Yeah, so really excited to have you guys here. Welcome. I appreciate you guys sticking around and working with us through this. Okay, so I am Taylor Dawson, and I'm the developer advocate here at Aggregating. I help to promote our products and help other developers use our API and build really cool things with it as well. So what we're going to talk about first is like, what is Aggregating, like what do we do and what's the data that we have. Then we're going to quickly go over our API and the different endpoints that we support. Finally, we're going to talk about Google Sheets and the scripts, kind of introduce us to that, go over some examples of that, and then moving on to the Postman visualizations. And then finally, we'll have a brief time for Q&A. We always love feedback, so if you guys can shoot us an email or hit us up on Twitter in the comment, let us know what you think either of the webinar or any of our other products we offer. Any questions that you have as well is great. Okay, so what is Amber Data? I like to call Amber Data your one-stop shop for all your blockchain data needs. That includes on-chain and off-chain data. We have a comprehensive blockchain and market data API with multi-chain support now. We support over 5 different blockchains, which is really cool. And we have blockchain analytics, metrics, and security. Some of that data is available via our API, as well as on our dashboards and panels in our Explorer. So here's an example of some of the panels that we offer, different metrics that have to do with the blockchain network integrity. As you can see here, there's like transaction status, you can see that, and down below you can also see our vulnerabilities overview, which is really cool. We actually do security audits on all new smart contracts that hit the network, so you can see if that token that you're looking at investing in is actually secure and see what type of issues that it has. So I think that's a really cool thing to check out on our website. It's also really good to use the Explorer. It's similar to EtherScan. You can kind of look at the data that we support, and then the data that is on our panels, you're most likely will be able to get via our API as well. Okay, so it's really easy to get an API key. We can actually just go to our onboarding page, and it talks about the different steps you have to go through, like creating an account, and then after that you can just get your free developer API key and start using the API and testing that out. Okay, so our API has over 100 endpoints and counting, and we have both real-time and historical blockchain and market data. You can access that real-time data via our WebSockets and multi-chain data support as well. So all of the endpoints that we have apply to all the different blockchains. So same endpoints, different blockchains, we just change a header, which we'll see in a second. And then we have a JSON RPC support as well. That enables you to interact directly with the blockchain node, just in case people are still using legacy code that includes RPC requests. It just makes it easy to switch over. So we're going to look at our documentation real quickly. Let me switch tabs. Let's see. I'm going to switch over to our documentation real fast. Okay, so over here, this is our docs, this is README.io, and right here I want to talk about the blockchain ID header. This is where you can set the different blockchain ID that you need when you're going and getting that data. So it makes it really simple to switch between different blockchains because you just switch out the header and then you're able to get data from that blockchain, which we'll see in a second using Google Sheets. Over here, you can see the different categories of data that we support. So up here, we have our market data. Down here, you can see more of our blockchain data. We're kind of categorizing them based on different pieces of blockchain data. So specifically, this is our blockchain addresses, endpoints, and blockchain blocked endpoints, et cetera. Something that's really cool to point out is that you can actually try out our endpoints right in the documentation. So once you get that API key, you can place it here along with the blockchain ID of the blockchain that you're interested in getting data from. And then you can hit try it now, and you'll see live blockchain data coming back from here, right from our endpoints. So that's pretty handy. And you can just continue seeing all the different endpoints you support. Down here, we have our WebSocket documentation. It kind of explains the different WebSocket events that we support. We do blockchain data as well as real-time market data down here, as that you can see. And again, it applies to multi-blockchain as well for some of these things. And finally, down here, you can see our JSON RPC endpoints, which again enable you to talk as if you're talking directly to a live node. In this case, these ones are for Ethereum, And these events are, or these RPC methods are for specifically for Bitcoin and their derivative blockchains. Okay, sweet. So Google Sheets. So what I really think is cool about Google Sheets and using scripts to bring data into a Google Sheet is that it's familiar. A lot of people are familiar with have been using Excel for a while, or they've been using Google Sheets. And it's really easy to chart, to sort, and to aggregate the data. And then you can actually quickly analyze and view that data. It's really useful if you're going to show that data off maybe to potential investors, or if you're working on a project and you need to bring in data to look at and analyze different things about a specific token, or if you're interested in analyzing market data, or even trying to find anomalies or anything like that in blockchain data for whatever reason. It makes it really easy if we can get that data into a Google Sheet. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here is I have a few examples of what it looks like to get data from our API into a Google Sheet. So first up, as you can see over here, we're looking at data pertaining to a specific token. In this case, it's a token called Kyber token. And the reason I chose this as our example is because Kyber token has mint and burn events. And so you can actually watch as the total and circulating supply can kind of drop because they're burning tokens, and so their actually total supply will go down. And yeah, so basically we have the timestamp. I added the number of token holders here, and then the circulating supply, total supply, this is the data that we're using to generate this chart right here. And this is different input parameters that we can use, which we'll see in a second, which pertain to our Google script in the background. So we can change our time frame between day and hour. For instance, if I want to switch this to a by hour basis, and I'll hit run, and looks like there's an issue there. But let's see, I'm curious why that happened. But anyways, so what happens with this button right here is that we can actually assign a script to it. And in this case, I assigned the token analysis script, which we'll look at in a second, which apparently has some sort of issue with it. But if we come over here to our Google Scripts tab, you can see that this is the function that we assigned to the button. And what we're going to do is we start by setting up our request options. And so right here, we can set our method and our headers, etc. And then we're going to get a reference to that Google Sheet. And then finally, we're going to get our input values from the Google Sheet. So in this case, we want to get the token address and the time interval, and then the decimals, just like what we saw here. So this is kind of the way that we're getting those values from our sheet. Then first thing we want to do is we want to clear the data range, the range of data that we're going to be populating. We're going to set our base URL for the request. So this is the base URL for our API endpoint. And finally, we're going to make that request, and we're going to get the response here. The response comes back, and we're going to want to convert that to, want to get the content from the response as text. Once we have that, we want to turn it into JSON and parse it, and then start peeling off different pieces from that request. So this particular endpoint we're looking at is the historical token supply. So if we come back to our documentation, we will find that endpoint right here. So as you can see, the data comes back in this format. So we have the timestamp, number of folders, circulating supply, total supply. And then we have the different pieces of data that come back with that response. So when we're switching around this time interval, this is the query parameter that we're dealing with here. And yeah, and so as you can see, the object that comes back in response includes a payload and a data, as you can see right here, which is where that part's coming from. And then afterwards, we take that JSON data and we're going to iterate over our sheet, and we're going to set the value in the sheet for the blockchain data that came back. So that's the kind of what you're seeing there. One thing I did want to note is that what I did add here is a little example of where you can add your API key. So this is just a menu item that was added via a Google script. It's kind of beyond the scope of the webinar on how to add different menu items to the Google script. But as you can see here, we can actually enter your API key and we hit submit. It looks like our API key has been saved already, although there's probably potentially an issue with that, which is why the header was null. But so once we have our API key saved, when you first open up the sheet, you won't have this, it won't say that you have to save that API key until you actually enter your API key here. So that's kind of cool because it enables all of our scripts to access this API key value that we get when we set it in the Google Sheet. So if you want to come here, I'll show you an example of where we're getting the API key from. So we're using this thing called the property service that enables us to get a value that's been set via our menu item over here. And that value is the API key that the user will set. Sweet. Okay, so here is another example, and this is our multi-chain kind of example of the multi-chain data that comes back. And again, we have the timestamp, and this is the transaction volume, historical transaction volume per the different blockchain here. Again, we can set our time frame and our day. Right here, we can have different granularity, so we can do day, hour, minute, etc. And so right now we're looking at a 30-day look back window. And again, we have our button here that's assigned to a script that I'll show you in a second. And we have our chart here, which is charting the data that you see on the left. Okay, so this is the script that we were using to take in the historical transaction volume and put it into our Google Sheet. So it's kind of the same flow. We get a reference to the sheet, and then from there, we're going to get the input from the sheet cells. So in this case, we're kind of creating our time frame. So let's say we wanted 30-day. We get the number, which is 30, and then we get the value that we set with our dropdown, which is day. And so since we just wanted the first letter, we're going to go ahead and peel off that letter and then create our time frame right here. Then here's a list of blockchain IDs that we're going to iterate through and use in our request. Set up our request options, base URL, create a little helper function to make that HTTP request, just because we're going to be making about 5 requests. The kind of the key here is each request we're going to change that blockchain ID, and so we can get the historical transaction volume for each different blockchain. We're going to be making requests to this endpoint right here, and we're going to be setting our time frame right here, adding our request options, getting our response just like normal, and then we're going to return the parsed JSON from the request. Here's just a few constants that we're using that correspond to the column in the sheet. And again, we're going to be clearing our columns, and then we're going to iterate over using this function, getting all the historical transaction volume for each blockchain, creating our array, and then finally, we're going to be populating our sheet with all of that data right here. And lastly, so this one's really cool. And again, the complexity just is kind of rising, but as you can see here, this is the total token holdings for an address. So I chose this address for obvious reasons. It's clearly a whale. $13 million in ETH, that's a lot. So what you can do is you get a list of the addresses token holdings. In this case, I added Ether, just so we can kind of get a breakdown of the entire portfolio of this address. Right here, we can enter any address we want and then hit run, and we're going to get a different view depending on the address that we put in. I added some sorting features here, so we can sort by the amount in USD. This is the amount of tokens, the symbol, and then the name. So you can obviously sort by the different values here. I think it's most interesting to sort by USD value. Over here, you can see this is historical token holdings data. So I'll show you in a second what the script does, but essentially for each of these tokens here, we want to see, hey, what does it look like over the past like 30 days in this case, the different tokens, like at what point the balance changed for the different tokens that this address is holding. And then we created this fun little stacked area line chart, which shows the amount of tokens that this address holds at any given point in time. And again, we have like a ton of tokens that just holds, there's like 80 of them here. But it's kind of a cool idea of things that you can do with that historical token data. And it's also a cool example of how we're tying in 2 different Amber data endpoints for this particular Google Sheet. And if we come over here we can see the script that kind of brings all of this data together. So again, it's a little more complicated, but it's just kind of built on the same principles. So again, we're getting a reference to the sheet, we're getting the address from the input cells, and in this case, I'm using this little helper method I created. It's called Web3 data, and it kind of emulates, we have a Web3 data JS SDK, so it just makes it easier to make those requests. This just fills in our timestamp column for us. And then right here is the address balances function that we're using in order to populate the sheet. So again, we're clearing the range, making the request. So this, essentially what this does is it says, hey, make a request to this endpoint. Just makes it a lot simpler to make those requests. If you want to, we can log the data just for debugging. This is how you do that using a Google script, is using the logger. And then we're going to get the token data from that response. So if we want to look at that, we can actually come over here and see in our API, our address balances. Let's see, I think it's right here, endpoint. And so as you can see, that the data coming, oops, I think it switched. The data coming back includes this token property, which is a list of all the tokens that this address holds. But it also comes with the amount of balance in ETH in and out, and the current balance in ETH that address holds, which is really powerful. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to add that to our list of tokens. We're going to create a token, quote unquote, called ETH, just in this case, just so it looks better with our complete portfolio view. And then finally, we're going to iterate over our tokens. And for each token, we're going to hit the historical holders endpoint in order to get a historical view of that address's token holdings of that particular token. So in this case, we've actually made like 100 different HTTP requests to get the historical holders address. It actually went pretty quickly. If we don't have a timestamp column, we're going to fill that in. And if there are any historical token holdings, then we're going to populate that sheet, which is this whole thing right here, which is that data. I think that's being the chart down here. And then we're going to set the column header as the token holding name, or the token name. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and set all those values. And then finally at the bottom, we're going to populate on the left-hand side, over here, the list of tokens that this address holds, the name, the symbol, the decimals, or sorry, not the decimals, but the amount, and then finally the total in USD. Now, the kind of the way this works is if you see this right here, we're adding a query parameter called include price true. So if you come to our balances endpoint, you can see that we can make requests to this endpoint and actually set include price equal to true, which will include price data with the results, which is super powerful, right? So in this case, for every token that this address holds, it will actually tell you the total value in USD of that token based on the quote, which is how we're able to, with one HTTP request, we're actually able to get both the amount of tokens that address holds as well as the total value in USD, which is super powerful. We actually have a number of endpoints that do that, where you can get blockchain data combined with market data and actually see different values. For instance, if you want to see like a transaction going through, you can say, hey, 5 ETH went through, but here's the amount in USD. And as well, historical data includes that as well, so you can see based on the historical quote prices, which is really powerful. Yeah, so that's a really cool example. And again, so this endpoint right here is, let's see, down here, historical token holders. And what we're doing here is given a token address, we're going to get a list of historical holdings based on the holder address. So the data will come back looking like this with a timestamp, and then at that time, the amount that this address holds. We're just doing one address at a time for this case, but that's kind of where that data is coming from to populate this sheet right here. Sweet. Okay, so that was Google Sheets. Now we're going to look at Postman visualizations. Now, Postman is really cool because it gives you this really nice way to test and view data from endpoints, whether you're looking at Amber Data's API or you're looking at other different APIs. you can quickly like chart and organize that data now with this Postman visualization tool. It just uses, vanilla JavaScript and HTML templates, so it can be familiar to some folks, and it makes it a lot simpler, I think. And you can also use charting libraries just like you would using that CDN. Side note, Postman is actually hosting a webinar this Thursday for specifically talking about visualizations. So if you are curious to learn more about this, I would definitely check that out. Okay, now we're going to look at Postman. Okay, so basically what we're looking at here is and we have a Postman endpoint that we can run a GET request against. And in this case, we can set our query parameters either here or we can just type it in right here. But we're going to use this market rankings endpoint, which we can actually go to our documentation. I can show you what that looks like. We call it asset rankings here. So our market rankings endpoint enables you to kind of retrieve top ranked assets by a specific metric. In this case, we're going to be sorting by the liquid market type or market cap. And we're going to be sorting in this, the default, which is ascending order. And we're going to limit the size to 10. And so what Postman does is enables you to send these HTTP requests if you're not familiar, if you haven't used it before. And then you can just see a nice little view of the data that comes back. We use this a lot internally, but you can also use our collection that we have on our website. So you can actually test out our API endpoints and get live data this way if you're more comfortable with Postman. So once we have that data, we can actually use this new feature called Postman visualizations. And first, we create our template. So like I was saying earlier, it's just HTML. So we create a canvas where we're going to populate our chart. And then we import our charts.js, what we're going to be using as our charting library. And then in our script tag here, we're actually going to set up our chart. So basically, we create a new instance of this chart. It's going to be a bar chart. And this is the data that we're going to use to populate that chart. So right now, we're going to be populating the data a little bit later down below, which I'll show you. So we're not going to actually add any labels or data yet, but we are going to set the colors that we want for our bar chart. And then we have some options here. If you want to learn more about that, you can look at chart.js's documentation. But essentially what's going on here is that we're setting a title to our chart, and then we're specifying the X and Y axis, and then labeling those as well, and then setting them to display.
Tanner, we're not seeing your Postman. All we see is documentation set right now.
Oh, okay, 1 second. How's that?
Yes, can you go over what you talked about earlier? I think we missed the past couple minutes.
Oh yeah, can you see that now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just say that one more time. So again, with Postman, you can set the API endpoint that you want to look at right here, and then we can set our query parameters either by typing them in up here, or we can create new query parameters down here. So again, we're looking at the market rankings endpoint, which you guys have seen documentation for, but and then we're specifying our sort type to be liquid market cap. So it's going to sort it's going to get a list of all the assets, and it's going to rank them by liquid market cap, the first being the one with the highest liquid market cap. And then down here is where the data comes back. So with Postman, it's really cool because it enables you to quickly test these different API endpoints and then kind of see the data that's coming back from them. So this is the data, the top 10 liquid market cap assets. And then what I was talking about just a second ago were the test tab, which is where we're actually able to take the data coming from Postman and then populate it into a chart or a table, which you'll see in a second. But in this case, it's just vanilla HTML and JavaScript, right? So we create a canvas with an ID of my chart. And then right here, we're using our CDN to import our charts.js that we're going to be using. And then in this script tag is kind of where we're going to set up our chart. So we can reference to our chart via its ID. And then using that, we're going to create a new chart instance. It's going to be a bar chart. And then this is usually where you're going to populate the data that you want to see in your chart. But in this case, we're going to be populating that later using the get data, which we'll see in a second. So we'll skip that for now. And then down here, you'll see that there are the background colors to our bar that we're going to, again, you'll see that in a second. So we're just going to set those. And then finally, we have our title to our chart. And then we're setting up the different X and Y axes. So we have the assets label for the X-axis, and then for the Y-axis, we're going to need the liquid market cap. And then down here is the get data function I was talking about a second ago. So when we pass in our data to the visualizer.set function, we're going to be able to access the data that's coming back in our response. And then we can populate the data set 0, which is right up here. And then we're going to set our labels. And then we update the chart, which redraws it with the new data. Okay, so when you make a response with Postman, you actually can get this, the data that we see here as JSON with this method. So once we have the response, we're going to create this object called visData. And the labels are going to be the name of that asset. So we're going to iterate over using map. We're going to iterate over and pull out the name. So if you can see right here, we have the name, which is Bitcoin. So it's going to create a label, an array of those names. So Bitcoin, ETH, XRP, et cetera. And that's going to be our labels. And then we're going to get the liquid market cap from this JSON object. So as you can see right here, is the liquid market cap. We're going to create another array that just holds the liquid market cap, which is going to be the data. And then finally, we'll use this method, and we're going to pass in our template string that we made up here. And then we're going to pass in this viz data. And this viz data object is what we're going to use in here. So this value comes in from the viz data, and we can access the data and the labels from that object. Finally, we can go over to the visualization tab, and we can actually see the bar chart that we just created from the data coming back from our endpoint. So as you can see here, you can see that the market rankings, and this is the liquid market cap of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, XRP, et cetera, all the way on down to Bitcoin SD. Now, obviously, we're just using liquid market cap here in this case, but you can create bar charts of all sorts of things, anything that you find useful. We can create bar charts out of that and get a quick kind of overview of whatever data you're looking at. Okay, so here's another example. This one's using our historical market prices endpoint. Now, this is kind of cool. So based on our supported exchanges and supported pairs, we can actually get the historical price of any pair. So in this case, we're looking at ETH as the pair, or as the base pair that base of the pair that we're looking at, and then I want to set the quote to USD. So basically, I want to get the historical view, pricing view of the ETH USD pair, and we want the time format to be coming back in ISO just because it's a lot more readable, and we want a 30-day look back window. And so from doing that, we can see our payload comes back with all that data, right? So this is our pricing data that we're looking at here. Now, if we come over to the test tab, we can actually do the exact same thing we did earlier with the bar chart, but it just looks a little bit different because we're going to be using a line chart in this case. So same exact idea, although this is a lot smaller example, which is really nice. So we have our labels here that we're going to populate with the timestamp, and then we have our data where we're going to populate with the price and our labels ETH USD, because that's the pair that we're looking at. Set up the colors, and then right here, doing the exact same thing where we pass in the data, and then we want to only look at the last 100. That's why I do the slice here, and then we update our chart. Same exact process. Get the JSON data as a JavaScript object, and then create our labels and create our data. In this case, we're going to parse it into a float, and because it comes back as a string, as you see right here. And then we're going to also format the time in a more readable format to kind of get rid of the extra part of that. And then finally, we're going to set our template in the viz data, and voila. So here's our historical line chart of the ETH-USD pair. And as you can see, it's based on more of like a minute granularity. But yeah, so this is basically the price that we can see of this pair over the, the past 30 days or so. And yeah, so that's another example of using that data. And then finally, here is another endpoint that we have, which is just a list of typical address transactions. So give me an address, give me a list of all the transactions. But in this case, we set token transfers equal to true. So we're actually going to get a list of transactions, but if that transaction transfers a token that's in that transaction, will come back showing that token transfer and the data associated with that. So here's what the data looks like coming back from our API. And I'm going to show you an example of what a token transfer would look like. So the data comes back with this transaction as most of the data that you'd ever really need. There's actually optional parameters to include the validation. So you can actually validate that transaction coming from our endpoint. Okay, so here's a token transfer object. That means in this transaction, a token is actually transferred. And so it tells you the amount, the decimals that we talked about earlier in Google Sheets. It's not always 18, so in this case it's 6. So it tells you how we can format this. And then it tells you additional details about that. So it looks like this is Tether.
So Taylor, let me stop you right there. Because we started late today and I want to respect everyone's time. So I actually want to open up to see if there's any questions from our attendees with whatever we're covering today.
Okay.
If you have a question, you can either raise your hand and I'll give you the mic, or you can type in your question into the chats or the Q&A feature of Zoom. And while waiting for everyone's question, I just want to reiterate Umbrellas API and what we're offering. We combine validated blockchain data, and today we support 8 different blockchains. That's Ethereum, Ethereum testnet, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, Zcash, and Stellar. And as well as we connect to 17 crypto exchange today and have all the trade information, including level 2 order books. So we combine on-chain data with exchange trading data into a single API and available via RPC, REST API, and as well as WebSockets. All right, looks like we don't have any questions. Not yet. I will still wait. Taylor, is there anything else you'd like to wrap up?
Yeah, if there's no other questions, really thank you for your patience, and thank you for sticking it out to the end of our webinar. We're really excited to be able to show off all the cool stuff, all the cool data that we have, and all the awesome use cases that we can use that data for. Yeah, if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask here, you can always contact us, again, via Twitter or our intercom or our email. And as always, check out our website, our documentation, and follow us on Medium and Twitter. Thanks.
Well, thank you, everyone.